Thank you, Corinne, for the introduction. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me? Yeah. I'm delighted to be here and very appreciative that I get an opportunity to be in this beautiful city, historic city of Berlin. Sorry. And share with you in about, I was given 12 minutes. It was 10, I got it raised to 12. On two very important subjects, which, if handled well, can be game changers for a country, a society, or a civilization. And if not handled well, they could negate many of the good things which happen around us. So, ladies and gentlemen, as was just mentioned, my experience, 30 years in banking, 8 years in government around the world. I've lived in 10 countries, and I have, in banking, done everything from cashing checks to running large parts of a large financial institution, and ended up as in the management board of one of the largest financial institutions of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, when I arrived in Pakistan to be the finance minister and then later got elected as the prime minister, I was stepping into a country of 180 million people, a nuclear power, a country with every problem you could think of, and a lot of opportunity. I was very excited that I coming from a middle-class background with no political background at all, somehow managed to get to where I was. Having said all that, when you are in public office, people expect results, and they worry more about what will happen tomorrow than where you came from. So I got into Pakistan, a complex country with many challenges, and today I will focus my comments only on good governance or governance, and then how it can lead to reducing corruption. Both to me are interlinked. When I looked at the situation in my country, I said, if we have to improve governance, we have to have a philosophy which has to be communicated to all the people and then create a buy-in. Because if people don't know what you're doing and they don't accept what you're doing, you may work 18 hours a day, it'll make no difference. So initially, as finance minister, I crafted a very simple strategy, which I described in 3 words to the people of Pakistan, where incidentally the literacy rate is very low. So you have to communicate in very simple terms. And the whole strategy to turn around the economy of Pakistan, which had low growth, very high poverty levels, lack of investment, a current account deficit which made everybody very nervous, and negative reserves. The day I walked into office, we had $450 million of reserves and $1 billion of unpaid bills. That means negative reserves, because if you stop paying your bills, your bank balance will go up. So I looked around, and the strategy we came up with was that the country will now be governed from an economic standpoint with 3 basic principles: liberalization, deregulation, and privatization. And I explained each one because there was immediate reaction. Liberalization was necessary if you want to, and this all relates to fighting corruption. If you can do these 3 things right, you will see that the need for corruption will reduce. For example, I decided to privatize the phone company. And this was not given to friends or powerful people. We got international advisors, we got international bidders to come in, and the UAE telephone company, Etisalat, the Norwegians also bid, and the Singaporeans also bid. But it was open, transparent, and to prevent people from criticizing it, we rented a room in a large hotel like this. This was the first major privatization. Live on TV, we said the bidders will come, present their bids, the whole nation will watch, and we will award it to the best, the highest bidder. So that's what we did, so the reaction was not as bad as it used to be. In the pre-privatization days, if you needed a phone connection, landline, you had to wait 5 to 15 years. And you had to pay a lot of people to get the connection. So this deregulation, liberalization, removed that whole vested interest, a mafia which had built up, which could get you a phone. Otherwise, you were without a phone. And getting a phone in a house was like having a son or a daughter, a child. It was so proud. People came and congratulated you because they could then come and use that phone. So this happened, and we moved on. But ladies and gentlemen, also, I believe it is not the business of government to be in business. Governments should not be in business. Governments should be regulators and policymakers. But when you deregulate, this sounds contradictory, but it is in fact what we did. You must create a powerful, independent regulator to watch out for public interest. You cannot abdicate. Deregulation does not mean abdication. It means a different role. But then the regulator must know as much as the industry or more, rather than just be there saying no to everything and approving everything. Excuse me. So we did that, and at the same time, we unleashed cell phones into the country. And ladies and gentlemen, we had 4 or 5 private providers. We used to add 1 million phones a month, 1 million new phones a month, because the country is huge. And people felt empowered. People who never could dream of having a phone were having a phone. And they were happy and they were thankful. So this is just one little example to say that you can liberalize, you can privatize, you can deregulate, and really pay huge dividends to your people. Now, once that happened, we then had to move to the human capital in the government. Coming from the private sector, you have a bias that government people perhaps do not have all the skills which you get in the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, my experience was that they were as smart, if not smarter, than the people in the private sector. The only difference was we paid them nothing, we didn't train them, and they didn't have the basic facilities like computers, like good offices, like some training on the job as you would have in the private sector. So this, with major reforms coming, this was just one aspect of reform which I talked to you. I then went to the Kennedy School, and there's professors here from Harvard, and spoke to Dean Nye, and he and I designed a little program, because we couldn't send the whole bureaucracy to Cambridge, Massachusetts. We sent groups of 40 bureaucrats in middle level to just, I called it opening the mind course. And one group would go, the other would be ready. I met every group before they left and when they came back, just to get them excited and motivated. That made, and when they came back, 60% were charged up, 20% were negative, 20% were neutral, which was a pretty good average, I thought. If 60% can be moved, and the employees felt that finally the government cares and they're training us to change things. They're training us to give us new skills and bring us up the curve, because they had no training after they joined the government. I mean, they had some courses, but they were really neither here nor there. So that also was a major game changer. All this put together then allowed us to move ahead. The other thing we did, which was a double-edged sword, but I think if I had to do it again, I would do it again, we freed our media. The press, TV, we liberalized it. Today, Pakistan has 50 TV channels, private, 1 government. And the 50 TV channels, of course, they are quite critical. They are looking for news, they are creating news, and you have to be on your toes all the time. The print media also, of course, is totally deregulated. So if you want to have effective reform and good governance, a free, responsible media is a key member of civil society which can keep a check and balance on you. Plus, of course, you have many other institutions like opposition parties, your own parties, the MPs, Parliament, etc., etc. Today, of course, the other thing we have to ensure is rule of law. If your courts don't work, and if the courts don't give you what you have to do, this creates a major problem for the whole country. So we have improved that substantially. Of course, the judiciary is independent, but the judges, etc., after we had lots of issues with each other, the executive and the judiciary, for those of you who know Pakistan, we had a major battle. Finally, things settled, and I think the country is better off today. So, ladies and gentlemen, this then created an environment which allowed Pakistan to grow. And the growth rates, which people forget because Pakistan does have a bit of a brand issue. So when you mention Pakistan, you think of either nuclear proliferation or extremism and terrorism and the Taliban and all that. But the fact is, this 180 million people are one of the most industrious people you can come across, and they can do a lot if given the right environment. So 7.5% growth. We got out of the IMF program, and we went to markets. And getting away from the IMF was like going through a messy divorce. The IMF didn't want to let go, except the managing director, who then became your president here. He was supporting that get out of the program if you have the strategies to take your country forward. But the bureaucracy in the fund, excuse me, was against. Surprisingly, also, the bureaucracy within the government. People made careers by knowing the various rules of how the fund works. So I would be told, so-and-so is an excellent officer. I said, why is he an excellent officer? He or she is an excellent officer because they know all the minutiae of an IMF program. And that was a way of life. So we got out of that, we went into markets, and we never looked back. So, ladies and gentlemen, deregulation, liberalization, privatization, independent regulation, good policy making, these sound like, idealistic statements, but it can be done even in a complex and difficult country like Pakistan. If you lead from the front, if you have a society which will criticize you if you do wrong and hopefully praise you a little if you do right. Now we come to corruption. Let me roll back a little. One of my jobs in the banking field, one of my last job before I joined the government, was running the global wealth management business of a major financial institution in New York. So I was called in by the chairman and told that, look, we have a serious problem here. You go and find a solution and fix this. The government, the US government and its agencies were on to us, and there were really some serious things which were going on. When I looked at the situation, I obviously was quite shocked at what I saw, but then I also thought to myself that bad money, money which comes from illicit sources, corruption, etc., does not deserve a home. So we have to close all the loops, i.e. banks should never accept it. Society should not accept such people, and we banks have to play our part. So somebody told me that there is an NGO called Transparency International. And I found in the process Peter, who's sitting here today, and went to him and said, look, I have this problem. I have an idea how we can solve it. And we will go to regulators, we'll go to governments, we'll go to other banks, because one bank cannot do it. So make a long story short, we did go to the banks and the regulators. We made progress, and that's how came out these rules called the Know Your Customer rules, which sometimes are irritating to many customers. When you open an account, they want to ask you too much. But the whole reason for this was that there was certain people could open accounts anywhere and move millions and millions of dollars with no questions asked. And if we allow that as civil society, then we deserve what we get in corruption. So I worked with Peter, who's here, and he'd probably talk about it, and we came up with various rules. And frankly, we did not get as much positive response from various governments and regulators till 9/11 happened. When 9/11 happened, terrorism and money going into terrorism was a major issue. And that's when, of course, we made a lot of progress. So on corruption, and dealing with corruption, ladies and gentlemen, all I would say is there are some disappointments too. And all of you, as prominent members of society in a country which is so important, can play your part. First of all, laws should have anybody receiving a bribe or illicit payment to be liable, and also those who pay bribes to be equally liable. There's a UN convention on prohibiting such payments and not allowing, you would be shocked that there were many countries who used to allow such payments to be tax deductible. Forget not paying them, they were actually tax deductible. So the UN convention came out. It has still not been ratified by many countries, and I would urge all of you as important members of civil society in Europe to influence your governments to ratify these, because we are not asking for the moon here. Payments should be illegal and not allowed, and if it is done, then there's a whole process in that convention. But you'll be shocked that many governments have not signed off. So today, if you are a company and you want a contract far away in some other country, and you pay an incentive to somebody, which I would call a bribe, that is allowed. And it's really a travesty that in today's world, we can still get away with it. So all your support will be needed. Secondly, in many countries, receiving a bribe is a crime, but when the payer of the bribe is never prosecuted. That's another area where I think we need to have a wake-up call for everybody. In our government, when I was there, we also set up a procurement law for government. And while people find ways around it, having it in your code helps. How many bids do you want? What is the procedure, etc. This may sound boring, but actually, in government purchases is where a lot of bribery takes place and a lot of illicit activity takes place. So now another area which has come up, ladies and gentlemen, which will affect every facet of our lives, is social networking, the web. There are many websites today in many countries where if there is an element of corruption in society, people post it on there. They also post in some countries, if you go for a passport renewal, you have to pay this much money. If you go for this thing, you have to pay this much money. Here's the person who takes it. That is putting a lot of pressure on people. So we have to fight this war against corruption in every facet of what we do, because that is what will make us a better world and a more progressive world. And once people, the last point I would make, once people have good economic growth, good governance, they have enough to eat, they live comfortably, you will find that extremism and terrorism will reduce. My view on that, being a victim of extremists myself, is that this stems from deprivation. Extremism and terrorism, ladies and gentlemen, stems from deprivation. Deprivation can manifest itself in many forms. Lack of income, lack of human rights, lack of resolution of disputes, discrimination, not getting a rule of law, and so many other things. One part of it is also lack of interfaith harmony, where all of us have to play our part to bring the various faiths together. Today, I'm very sorry to say that the distance between faiths is increasing. The gap between different faiths is increasing, not decreasing. If we have to live, and our children have to live actually, in a more peaceful and harmonious world, we need better understanding. Here the clergy has to play a part, leaders have to play a part, and civil society has to play a part. So interfaith harmony is one key ingredient of reducing the threat of extremism and terrorism. Corruption knows no borders, crime knows no borders, and terrorism knows no borders. So all of us have to work collectively to fight these so that our society is better and we bequeath to our next and coming generations a world which is peaceful, progressive, and prosperous. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.